When I was young, I thought the whole idea of passive income sounded like a trick designed to sell lazy people a fantasy. Somebody sits on a beach, somebody checks a phone, somebody smiles at a notification, money appears. That is the mythology. Reality is less glamorous and a lot more useful. The first passive income I ever received that actually mattered to me emotionally would have looked laughable to a man trying to impress his neighbors. It was small, embarrassingly small, the sort of figure most people would step over on the sidewalk without bending down. But I understood something then that many people never learn. A tiny stream of money arriving without fresh labor is not valuable because of its size. It is valuable because of what it proves. It proves the machine can work. Most people want passive income before they have built the conditions that make passive income possible. They want the fruit before they have planted the tree. They want the tree before they have bought the land. And they want the land before they have learned how to earn enough money to stop eating the seed. That is why so many people stay stuck. They think passive income begins with yield. It does not. It begins with surplus. The first rule is that active income comes first. I do not care how many videos a person watches about dividends, real estate investment trusts, bond ladders, covered calls, or high-yield cash vehicles. If he has not solved the problem of earning more than he spends, he is not building passive income. He is window shopping in a neighborhood he cannot yet afford. That sounds harsh, but it is merciful compared with the lies most people are fed. The world keeps trying to convince ordinary people that passive income is a product. It is not a product. It is a protocol. A protocol starts with this question: how do I convert labor into surplus without leaking the surplus away through stupidity, vanity, and convenience? If you cannot answer that question, no account on earth will save you. I have watched people with high salaries build nothing because every increase in income was immediately promoted into a more expensive lifestyle. I have watched people with much lower incomes quietly build real freedom because they treated every extra dollar as a worker to be assigned, not a guest to be entertained. That is the difference. So if I were forced to start over from scratch, I would not begin by asking how to quit my job fast. That question ruins people. It makes them vulnerable to yield traps, leverage traps, and fantasy traps. I would ask a more intelligent question. How do I build an income operating system that begins with my own effort, protects what I save, compounds what I protect, and gradually replaces hours with cash flow? That is the right question. Once you ask it properly, the whole map changes. The first thing I would build is not a glamorous investment account. It would be a defensive reservoir. Most people call it savings. I call it friction control. The average person makes the same mistake with cash that a careless homeowner makes with water. He lets it run wherever gravity takes it and then acts surprised when the bill arrives. If your money sits in the same account that pays your bills, feeds your impulses, and absorbs every small emotional decision, that money is not saved. It is merely waiting to be spent. That is why I have always thought the ordinary checking account is one of the most dangerous places to store long-term discipline. It is too convenient. And convenience is one of the most expensive luxuries in finance because it disguises theft as ease. A proper cash reservoir does two things. It pays you something, and it removes the money from your line of temptation. I do not get excited about $1 of interest because it changes my life. I get excited because it tells me the money has been moved out of the zone where my own bad habits can reach it easily. That is the real victory. Most young people laugh at the first few dollars of interest the way they laugh at the first few vegetables in a garden. That is because they are looking at the present harvest instead of the habit being formed. I would rather see a young man earning $1 honest a month from a cash reserve he cannot easily raid than hear another speech from a man who claims he will invest aggressively one day after he finishes spending carelessly today. A high-yield cash vehicle is not where I would try to become rich. It is where I would train myself not to stay fragile. That distinction matters. Fragility is the disease that kills compounding before compounding begins. If you have no emergency cushion, every inconvenience becomes a liquidation event. A broken transmission, a missed paycheck, an unexpected flight, a medical bill, an unstable landlord, a family emergency. Suddenly, the investment plan is not an investment plan anymore. It is a hostage negotiation with reality. People talk about passive income while ignoring the simple fact that a man with no financial buffer does not own his future. His future owns him. So I would build that reservoir first. Not because the yield is spectacular, because it creates breathing room. And breathing room is the first real asset most people ever own. Once that reservoir is built, now the second machine can start. This is where most people finally begin to understand the difference between earning money and owning money. Earning money is temporary. Owning productive assets is structural. I have always liked businesses more than promises. If I buy part of a real business, I own an instrument that can make more money while I sleep than I could ever make by personally supervising every hour of my life. That is the miracle, not because it is magical, but because it is scalable. A good business can serve 10,000 customers without my participation in any one transaction. That is a better employee than any human being can become. Now, I would be very careful here, because beginners make a predictable mistake. They fall in love with the idea of stock picking before they have earned the right to do it intelligently. I do not say that because I think they are stupid. I say it because concentration is a privilege purchased with knowledge, emotional control, and time. Most beginners do not need more drama. They need more durability. That is why broad, low-cost ownership vehicles are so powerful. They let you own a slice of many productive enterprises at once. If one company disappoints, it does not destroy your whole system. If one management team proves foolish, the damage is diluted. If one industry goes through a difficult cycle, the rest of the economic machine can keep working on your behalf. This is not exciting, which is precisely why it works so well for ordinary people. Excitement is usually sold at a very high price in finance. Boredom often comes with a discount. Now, within that broad ownership machine, there is a particular form of ownership that catches the imagination of people trying to build passive income, the cash-paying business. A dividend is merely a business admitting that after it paid its employees, maintained its operations, funded its future, and still had real profits left, it decided to send part of those profits to the owners. That is not magic. That is civilization. You own a productive enterprise. It produces more than it needs. It sends the excess to you. There is something deeply satisfying about that arrangement because it is honest. It ties money received to profits created. But here again, beginners get themselves into trouble. They think the right question is, which yield is highest? That is usually the wrong question. Which businesses are likely to keep sending me cash 10 years from now without poisoning the principle that generates it? A gigantic yield from a weak business is often just a distress flare disguised as generosity. If a company is paying you lavishly while its core economics are decaying, that payout is not income. It is bait. I would much rather own a sensible stream from a durable machine than chase a flashy payout from something with a cracked foundation. That is why I have always thought of income investing as a test of character more than a hunt for percentages. A weak investor sees a high number and wants it. A strong investor asks what kind of business reality is required to make that number sustainable. That is the difference between clipping coupons and building wealth. If I were starting over, I would use broad dividend-oriented ownership, not because I believe dividends alone are the secret, but because they teach a powerful lesson early. They show you that cash flow can emerge from patient ownership long before your portfolio is large enough to impress anyone else. Those first payments matter psychologically. They are tiny ambassadors from the future. They whisper, keep going. Now, I want to make a point that many people miss. A lot of the public talks about passive income as if the income itself is the whole story. It is not. The real power is that a good ownership vehicle can give you two engines at once. The first engine is the cash it pays you today. The second engine is the growth in the asset that can make those payments bigger tomorrow. That is why so many people underestimate compounding. They think of it as a line. It is not a line. It is a staircase with invisible steps. For a long time you feel ridiculous because the additional income is too small to change your life. Then, very slowly, you realize the system is no longer adding. It is feeding itself. That is when people say things accelerated. Nothing accelerated. The protocol simply got large enough for them to notice. This is why starting small matters so much. A man who says he will begin when he has a large sum is usually just confessing that he does not respect scale. He thinks small numbers are unimportant. But wealth built honestly almost always begins with numbers that feel insulting. If you cannot respect the first $2, you will mishandle the first 200. You will injure the first 20,000. And if you cannot discipline yourself with 20,000, $1 million will only make you a larger version of the same fool. That is the brutal arithmetic of character. Now let us move to the third kind of machine, because the world does not only reward ownership, it also rewards lending. This is where many people get bored. And boredom once again becomes a hidden advantage. Stripped of all decorative language is a contract that says this: I will lend you money, and in exchange you will pay me for the privilege of using it and return my principal according to agreed terms. That is all compared with equity ownership. It is less glamorous and usually less explosive. But it has a role. If equity is a claim on upside, lending is a claim on structure. And structure has value, especially when your life requires predictability. I would never tell a young person to build his future entirely on lending. That is too timid for the earliest years if he has skill, surplus, and time. But as part of a passive income system, the lending bucket matters because it trains you to think in obligations, risk ranking, and return relative to certainty. When you lend to a weak borrower, you are not being clever by collecting a higher promised return. You are being paid to absorb a probability. You may not understand. That is why I have always preferred high-quality promises over sensational promises. Most people who get hurt in lending do not get hurt because they wanted stability. They get hurt because they wanted stability plus a yield that belonged to a much riskier world. You cannot routinely collect junk compensation while pretending you bought safety. Finance does not work that way. If I were starting over, I would use bond exposure not as a get-rich engine, but as a stabilizer and an income layer. Something that reminds me that not all cash flow must come from the same source, and that survivability improves when your system contains pieces that behave differently under stress. A good financial life should not be built like a single-engine plane. It should have redundancy. Then comes the fourth machine, the one people love to romanticize because it feels tangible. Real estate, I understand the appeal completely. People like touching what they own. They like the idea that rent is paid by human necessity. They like seeing walls, roofs, and doors rather than ticker symbols. There is nothing irrational about that instinct. But I have also learned that direct real estate can be one of the easiest ways for amateurs to buy themselves a second job while calling it passive income. A leaky roof is not passive. A tenant dispute is not passive. A vacancy at the wrong moment is not passive. A plumbing emergency at midnight is not passive. That does not make real estate bad. It means most people should be more honest about what kind of ownership they want. If what you want is economic exposure to real estate without becoming a part-time operator, then a real estate investment trust can be a far better bridge. It gives you diversified participation in rent-producing assets, and it removes a great deal of operational friction that ordinary investors underestimate until they are already trapped inside it. Again, I do not worship the wrapper. I care about the protocol. Own real assets. Collect cash flow. Avoid concentration where ignorance is high. Reduce avoidable headaches. Keep scale on your side. That is the protocol. Now the fifth machine is where the conversation gets more dangerous, because this is where people try to become sophisticated before they have become steady. Covered call income has a certain seductive elegance to it. You own the shares, you agree to sell them at a specified higher price for a limited period. In exchange, you receive immediate premium income. If the price does not get there, you keep the shares and the premium. If it does, you still keep the premium and the shares are called away. I understand why people find that attractive. It feels like harvesting little pieces of volatility and converting them into cash. Used carefully, with a proper base of assets underneath it, it can absolutely be part of an income architecture. But this is not where I would tell a beginner to begin mentally, because the real lesson is not the tactic. The real lesson is sequence. Most people try to jump straight to the advanced income feature while they are still missing the first 4 layers of the machine. They want to monetize options before they have built resilience. They want premium income before they have learned patience. They want complexity before they have demonstrated discipline. That is backwards. Complexity should be layered on only after simplicity is functioning. That is true in bridges, it is true in businesses, it is true in investing, and it is especially true in passive income systems. So if I started over, my sequence would be mercilessly clear. First, I would increase active income, ruthlessly skills, promotions, side work, better positioning, whatever honest methods improved my labor output. Because passive income without meaningful surplus is just wishful thinking on a spreadsheet. Second, I would build a cash reservoir that protects me from fragility and pays me something while it waits. Third, I would begin broad ownership of productive enterprises with a bias toward low-cost vehicles and cash-paying businesses. Not because I need immediate luxury, but because I want my first ownership machine running as soon as possible. Fourth, I would add a contractual income layer through lending instruments that improve stability rather than pretend to be miracles. Fifth, I would add real estate exposure in a way that matches my actual temperament, which for most people means not confusing physical ownership with intelligent ownership. And only then, if the asset base were large enough and my behavior disciplined enough, would I consider harvesting option premium as a supplemental layer. That is how you build passive income fast. In the only sense of fast that matters, not fast in internet time, fast in structural time, fast in the sense that you stop making beginner mistakes early, fast in the sense that you stop leaking every extra dollar into consumption, fast in the sense that your money begins reporting for work long before your peers even understand the assignment. That is real speed. Now let me tell you what I would not do. I would not tell myself that a high-yield savings account is enough forever. It is not. A reservoir is not a river. It protects. It does not build empire-level growth. I would not chase the highest dividend yields without interrogating the economics underneath them. I would not buy bonds merely because they sound safe without asking who is borrowing and what risk I am being paid to bear. I would not buy a real estate story just because people enjoy saying tenants pay your mortgage. Tenants do not erase bad underwriting, and I would not let the dream of quitting my job distort the order of operations. That dream has wrecked more portfolios than bad luck ever did. The right ambition is not to quit your job quickly. The right ambition is to build a system so durable that one day your job becomes optional without your life becoming fragile. There is a huge difference between those two sentences. The first sentence attracts gamblers. The second sentence creates owners. Another truth I would carve into the wall if I had to start over is this. Passive income does not begin when the cash flow gets large. It begins when the system becomes repeatable. That is the moment worth celebrating. A person who earns $40 of honest passive cash flow from a repeatable protocol has something much more valuable than a person who stumbles into a one-time lucky gain with no system underneath it. Because the first person has a blueprint. Blueprints are what become fortunes. A blueprint tells you where the next dollar goes. It tells you what not to touch. It tells you what threshold unlocks the next stage. It tells you when complexity is earned. It tells you what role each account plays. Without a blueprint, money just piles up and leaks out according to mood. With a blueprint, money becomes personnel. Some dollars are guards, some are lenders, some are landlords in absentia, some are future volatility harvesters, and all of them answer to one rule: stay in the system. That is why I have always believed wealth is less about brilliance than about containment. Most people do not fail because they never encountered a good idea. They fail because they had no container strong enough to hold the idea long enough for it to work. They moved the emergency fund too early. They sold the boring fund too early. They chased yield too early. They reached for complexity too early. They treated a little progress as permission to become careless. I have seen this pattern in business, in markets, and in family money. The early stages of wealth are not won by glamour. They are won by behaving sensibly for longer than other people think is emotionally reasonable. That is what the public hates hearing. They want a stock, a shortcut, a tax trick, an app, a secret strategy, or a monthly income target that makes them feel already free before they have built the architecture of freedom. Freedom does not arrive like that. Freedom arrives when the system gets large enough that your labor is no longer carrying the whole structure by itself. And when that day comes, it feels almost anticlimactic. The phone buzzes, the money arrives. The figures are larger than they used to be, but by then, The real victory has already happened. The real victory was not the notification. The real victory was all the months and years before it, when you kept moving dollars from labor into structure while nobody applauded and nothing looked dramatic. That is the part I admire. That is the part worth copying. If I started over, I would not chase the image of passive income. I would build the staircase. I would turn active effort into surplus. I would move the surplus out of temptation. I would own productive businesses. I would layer in contractual income. I would add real asset exposure intelligently. I would earn the right to use advanced income tools. I would start with amounts so small they felt almost embarrassing, and I would still respect them because I know now what I did not know when I was younger. A tiny stream of money arriving without fresh labor is not a joke. It is a signal. It is proof that capital can learn to work. And once capital learns to work, your life changes in only one way that matters. Your time stops being sold 1 hour at a time. That is the final test I would use. Not, can this make me look smart this year? Not, can this help me post a screenshot online? Can this replace my job by next summer? I would ask something better. Does this account, this asset, this protocol move me one step closer to a life where my bills are paid more by ownership than by exhaustion? If the answer is yes, I would keep going. If the answer is no, I would stop pretending and rebuild the system. That is the contract I would sign with my future self. I will not confuse yield with freedom. I will not confuse complexity with intelligence. I will not confuse a small start with a small future. I will protect my surplus. I will respect boring accounts because they are the soil. I will own productive assets because they are the engine. I will diversify because fragility kills compounding. I will add advanced tactics only after my foundations are real. I will stop asking how to escape work quickly and start asking how to convert work into workers. And I will remember that passive income is not a miracle you buy. It is a system you build. Build it correctly, and one day the notifications arrive. Build it incorrectly, and you spend your whole life chasing them. I know which side I would choose.